All right, let's roll through some key price points on the Grand Cherokee 2-row here. The base model rear-wheel drive, that's the Laredo trim, is going to be $38,720. If you want four-wheel drive, that's going to be $40,720. That is notably higher than the least expensive midsize crossovers in the U.S. because the Grand Cherokee, as we're going to talk about here, is definitely a different kind of vehicle. According to Jeep, they expect the limited trim to be the most popular version of the Grand Cherokee. That's going to start at $45,040, $47,040 if you want four-wheel drive. We then have the Trailhawk at $54,630. That's the most off-road capable version of the Grand Cherokee. The Summit Reserve trim that I was driving today, $65,175 is where it started, and you can get that up to about $74,000. Now, one big thing to know about the Grand Cherokee, and really pretty much every Jeep currently on the lot, is that the destination charge is pretty darn high. Just about $1,800, $1,795 to be specific. That is nearly $1,000 higher than some of the lowest destination charges in the US. And of course, the destination charge is non-negotiable, so definitely keep that in mind. In terms of value, the limited trim is definitely a solid buy in the Grand Cherokee lineup, but there are a few things to know. The infotainment system is not the 10-inch system that you saw in this video. It's actually a slightly smaller 8.4-inch system. You can opt into the 10-inch system, however, if you want to. It's about $1,000. Also about $1,000 is the optional passenger screen display, and interestingly, you can option that into your limited trim, but not with the 8.4-inch screen. You have to opt into the 10.1-inch infotainment screen, then you get the 10.1-inch passenger screen as well. A few other things to know, features like passive entry, 360-degree camera, rain sense wipers, those are all still optional on that $47,000 four-wheel drive model, and a limited trim, if you had everything on it, can get up to over $55,000. Now, if you want the V8 in your Grand Cherokee, you have relatively few options. The Trailhawk is where the V8 is going to start. That's going to be $58,030 minimum for that V8 engine, and the Overland trim, which is the luxury interpretation with the V8 engine, that's going to start at $60,035. The next thing you should know is that comparisons are pretty difficult with the Grand Cherokee. You could look at this as just any old mainstream midsize crossover, or you could logically be cross-shopping against a Hyundai Santa Fe or a Ford Edge or something along those lines, something with two rows, or you could be looking at this as a luxury off-roader, theoretically what the Grand Cherokee was designed for. You could see it as a value alternative to a BMW X5 or a Mercedes-Benz GLE or a Range Rover Sport. And although that may sound strange to some folks, if you sit inside the Summit Reserve trim of the Grand Cherokee, you can definitely see that interior parts quality and the style is really pretty close to some of those luxury options. There are a few areas where the Grand Cherokee falls apart a bit if you were to make those Mercedes and BMW comparisons. But the fact that you can say that about a Jeep is really saying where Jeep has come over the last few years in terms of interior quality and in terms of design. But let's start with the off-roading alternatives here first. Obviously, the most direct off-roading alternative is the Toyota 4Runner. Now, the 4Runner is getting pretty darn old. It is over 13 years old at the moment. And part of that is a feature rather than a bug for some of the 4Runner shoppers, because it has the promise of reliable, rugged body-on-frame transportation with proven systems. It has a 5-speed automatic transmission. Some people may laugh at that, but the 5-speed has been very reliable. It also has a very reliable 4-liter V6 engine. But that V6 engine is pretty darn thirsty, and it only produces 270 horsepower. So in terms of performance, especially on-road performance, where honestly the 4Runner and the Grand Cherokee are going to be spending more of their time than off-road, the 4Runner is just not as much fun to drive as the Grand Cherokee. The Grand Cherokee is no lightweight, but it does feel lighter and more nimble and certainly more modern than the 4Runner. Despite the solid axle and the body-on-frame construction, you can only tow 5,000 pounds with your 4Runner. Now, the frame was designed for higher towing ability, but the engine and transmission that we find currently in the 4Runner, as well as the cooling systems related to those components, doesn't appear to be designed for more than 5,000 pounds of towing ability. And logically, with just 270 horsepower on tap, you're probably not going to want to tow too much more than that. As far as off-road software goes, it is significantly more refined in the Jeep. Now, again, some people might find this a feature, some people might find it a bug, but if you're using crawl control, hill descent control, things like that, it is significantly smoother and more refined in the Jeep. These two vehicles have very different off-road philosophies. Jeep has the adaptive air suspension available, there's a locking rear differential, but it can also act as a torque vectoring rear differential, which is a little bit different than the one that we find in the 4Runner. They both have 2-speed transfer cases, and neither one of them has a front locker. The traction management software on both of these vehicles is definitely designed with more rugged off-roading in mind, and it's going to direct power around wheel to wheel even when you're not using the locking differential or the 2-speed transfer case. Now, speaking of transfer cases, the 4Runner is a little bit different. Most of the versions you'll find out there are going to have part-time 4-wheel drive, whereas the Grand Cherokee really favors full-time 4-wheel drive. Now, there are models of the 4Runner that have full-time 4-wheel drive, but there's also a twist there. It uses a true torsion center differential, and there's some pros and cons to that particular design, just as we find pros and cons to the solid axle design and the KDSS suspension system that is available in the 4Runner versus the airlift suspension that we find in the Grand Cherokee. Now, moving along, let's talk about more of an on-road focused crossover, the Ford Edge. The Edge is definitely more practical when it comes to interior cargo space, interior volume, etc. Has a lower load-in height for the cargo in the back. It's much more of a road-going crossover. Obviously, it cannot hold a candle to the off-road ability of the Grand Cherokee, but there are definitely going to be some benefits to choosing the more on-road variant here. Fuel economy is going to be higher. There's no plug-in hybrid available, but for most folks out there, real-world fuel economy in the Edge is going to be higher. You're also going to get, generally speaking, slightly better handling ability in the Edge. It's going to have a lower center of gravity. Everything is going to be closer to the ground. It's going to be a more car-like driving experience. On the other hand, if you're looking for a more robust 4-wheel drive system, more capable traction management software, of course, higher towing ability, or a V8 engine, you're going to find those only on the Grand Cherokee. The Grand Cherokee also has a much more premium interior than we find in the current generation Ford Edge. And that's why we need to talk about the Range Rover Sport next. Think of the Grand Cherokee and the Range Rover Sport as luxurious and mainstream versions of the same idea. Or, I guess if you're talking about the Summit Reserve trim that we were driving, more luxurious and less luxurious versions of the same idea. These two vehicles are from brands that are dedicated to off-road vehicles only. Jeep is the mainstream off-road brand in the United States. Land Rover is the only dedicated luxury off-road brand in the United States. So keep that in mind when Jeep says something like, we're going to be the most fuel-efficient off-road brand in the United States, or most fuel-efficient SUV brand in the United States. Since there are only two, all you have to do is beat Land Rover and you have won. And that's why we're finding so many plug-in hybrid systems available in the lineup. The Grand Cherokee especially gets a new plug-in hybrid system. Other interesting twist, the plug-in hybrid system in the Grand Cherokee and the plug-in hybrid system in the Land Rover lineup, it's very, very similar because both of them use ZF 8-speed automatic transmissions and both of them use a pancake electric motor between that ZF transmission and the engine. Also, apparently, both of those electric motor modules, it appears, are built by ZF in Germany. Now, obviously, these two companies are developing the software systems that control that hybrid system on their own, but the theory of operation and the functionality is honestly very, very similar. Also very similar is the off-road ability between the Land Rover lineup and the Grand Cherokee lineup. They both have adaptive air suspensions for extra lift, better water fording capability. They both have e-lockers in the rear, which can vary that locking capability in the back. They both have 2-speed transfer cases, basically the same 8-speed automatic transmission. The engine lineup definitely is a difference between these two vehicles. The Grand Cherokee uses a naturally aspirated V6, the turbocharged plug-in hybrid, or a naturally aspirated V8 engine, and the Land Rover lineup, they're gradually shifting towards much smaller displacement inline engines. Land Rover does have V8 engines available in some of their vehicles, but in the vehicles that are remotely within the price range of the Grand Cherokee, it's primarily going to be their inline 4 turbocharged engine and the inline 6 turbocharged engine with or without a hybrid system or a mild hybrid system. The main difference, of course, is that the Grand Cherokee is going to cost tens of thousands of dollars less. The interior doesn't come across quite as refined, quite as cohesive, I guess you might say, as the Land Rover interior. There are some areas where the Grand Cherokee, I think, is nicer designed and feels a little bit more premium than the Land Rover interior, but the interior parts quality consistency in the Land Rover is a little bit higher. Everything is really equally done as far as the fit and finish from the top of the dashboard all the way to the bottom, all the way across the door panels, etc. And the Grand Cherokee has a few more highs and lows on the interior. I think it's easy to see why the Grand Cherokee sells so well in the United States. It spans an incredible breadth, all the way from the base Laredo trim all the way up to the very top-end Summit Reserve in 3-row format, where the price tags are around $80,000, definitely right up there with the Land Rover. And the Grand Cherokee is pretty unique in the US in still offering a V8 engine in a relatively compact crossover format. You can, of course, get V8s in full-size SUVs in the United States, but the Grand Cherokee is considerably smaller than that, and it's still a naturally aspirated V8 if that's something that you're interested in. Although, don't expect that engine to live too much longer because it's probably going to be replaced by the new twin-turbo inline-6 engines that we do see in the Wagoneer and Grand Wagoneer. But more importantly than that, the Grand Cherokee has the promise of rugged off-road ability. Rear-wheel drive, obviously, if that's something that you're looking at, is going to be an important factor for some folks. If you want an SUV with rear-wheel drive driving dynamics, this is practically the only one in its segment outside of luxury options. And of course, if you want a real four-wheel drive system with an actual two-speed transfer case, a locker in the rear, etc., you're only going to find that in the Grand Cherokee, outside, again, of some of those much more expensive luxury options. If you want to take off-road capability to the next level, you're going to have to give up a lot of those luxury features and gadgets and gizmos, etc., and get something like a Wrangler or a Bronco, or you're going to have to move all the way up the ladder and get something like a G-Wagon, because even the Land Rover lineup and the Range Rover lineup really is not going to be that much more off-road capable, if at all, than the Jeep Grand Cherokee. Be sure and let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below, and if you're interested in the Grand Cherokee, what are you cross-shopping it against? I would love to know down there. Find me over at Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all those other social places, and I'll see all of you next week.